The first sign that something was wrong appeared on a quiet Tuesday morning. The sun had barely risen above the tree line when Ethan Walker stepped onto the front porch of the property he had spent 15 years building with his own hands. The 40-acre parcel sat just outside the boundaries of a growing suburban community known as Cedar Ridge Estates. While the neighborhood itself was governed by a powerful homeowners association, Ethan's land existed beyond the HOA's authority. At least, that was how things had always been. For years, Ethan had enjoyed the peace and privacy that came with owning rural property. A retired contractor, he preferred the simple routine of maintaining fences, caring for livestock, and keeping his land exactly the way he wanted it. He had no interest in neighborhood politics, HOA meetings, or the endless disputes that seemed to consume many of the residents living inside Cedar Ridge. Yet over the previous year, things had begun to change. The subdivision had expanded rapidly. New homes appeared every few months. Developers pushed farther toward the countryside. Property values climbed. With each expansion came more HOA regulations, more enforcement officers, and more complaints. Many of Ethan's neighbors inside Cedar Ridge frequently spoke about the HOA's growing power. Stories circulated about fines for garden decorations, citations over paint colors, and inspections that seemed increasingly aggressive. Ethan usually ignored the gossip. Their rules did not apply to him, or so he thought. Several months earlier, survey crews hired by a development company had appeared near the edge of his property. They spent days measuring land and marking boundaries. Shortly afterward, construction began on a new section of Cedar Ridge, directly adjacent to Ethan's acreage. That was when the problems started. At first, it was small things. Vehicles occasionally turned down his private gravel road by mistake. Delivery trucks entered his property while searching for new addresses. Workers left trash near his fence line, annoying but manageable. Then came the HOA patrols. Cedar Ridge had recently created a private enforcement division. Officially, the patrol existed to monitor common areas and ensure community regulations were followed. Unofficially, many residents viewed them as a neighborhood police force that had become far too comfortable exercising authority. Several patrol vehicles had been spotted driving near Ethan's property over the previous weeks. Twice he noticed tire tracks crossing sections of his land. One afternoon he discovered a bright orange marker attached to one of his fence posts. The marker displayed a code number associated with HOA enforcement inspections. That discovery immediately concerned him. He removed the marker and thought little of it. A few days later, another one appeared. Then another. Someone was clearly entering his property. The situation escalated when Ethan found a formal notice attached to his gate. The document claimed portions of his fencing violated community appearance standards. Community appearance standards. The phrase alone made him laugh. His property wasn't part of Cedar Ridge. The notice carried no legal authority whatsoever. Still, the fact that someone believed they could issue citations to a landowner outside the HOA's jurisdiction was troubling. Ethan contacted the association office and requested clarification. The response he received raised even more questions. Rather than acknowledging a mistake, HOA representatives insisted there was an ongoing review regarding boundary alignment between Cedar Ridge and several adjacent parcels. They claimed certain enforcement activities were necessary while surveys remained under evaluation. The explanation made no sense. Property lines were already established. County records clearly showed ownership boundaries. There was nothing to evaluate. After that conversation, Ethan began documenting everything. He installed additional security cameras. He photographed every marker and notice. He saved copies of all correspondence. Years of working construction had taught him a simple lesson. When something feels wrong, keep records. The cameras soon revealed troubling footage. Multiple HOA patrol vehicles were entering sections of his property without permission. Some remained only a few minutes. Others stayed longer. Several patrol members walked through wooded areas and photographed structures on his land. One video showed individuals measuring sections of fencing. Another showed someone examining his barn. The recordings left little room for misunderstanding. This wasn't accidental. Someone had deliberately instructed HOA personnel to enter private property. As weeks passed, the visits became more frequent. Meanwhile, rumors spread among nearby residents. Several people mentioned hearing discussions at HOA meetings regarding future expansion plans. Some believed the association intended to acquire additional land. Others claimed developers wanted access through Ethan's acreage. No one seemed certain, but one pattern emerged consistently. Ethan's property was becoming a topic of interest. The attention intensified when a new HOA president took office. Karen Holloway had built a reputation for aggressive enforcement and ambitious growth projects. Within months of assuming leadership, she launched multiple initiatives aimed at expanding community influence. Many homeowners supported her. Others quietly feared her. Karen viewed Cedar Ridge less as a neighborhood and more as a brand. She envisioned luxury entrances, recreational facilities, walking trails, and new housing developments. To achieve those goals, additional land would be necessary. Land that happened to border Ethan's property. The connection became difficult to ignore. One evening, Ethan reviewed security footage and noticed something that immediately caught his attention. An HOA patrol truck stopped near his western fence line. Two individuals exited the vehicle. They studied maps. One pointed repeatedly toward a meadow located entirely inside Ethan's property. After several minutes, both returned to the truck and left. The behavior seemed oddly specific. The following day, Ethan visited the county records office. What he discovered shocked him. Recent filings showed inquiries regarding easements, access corridors, and development possibilities involving parcels adjacent to Cedar Ridge. His parcel appeared among them. No transfer had occurred. No ownership change existed, but someone was clearly exploring options. That realization transformed concern into suspicion. Someone wanted his land. The question was how far they were willing to go. Over the next month, tension steadily increased. Patrol vehicles appeared almost daily. Several neighboring landowners reported similar encounters. Some complained of survey stakes appearing on private property. Others received notices referencing HOA regulations, despite living outside community boundaries. The pattern suggested something much larger than overzealous enforcement. One Saturday morning, Ethan awoke to alerts from multiple security cameras. The notifications arrived one after another. Movement detected. Movement detected. Movement detected. He opened the live feeds. 3 HOA patrol vehicles had entered his property through a service gate near the eastern boundary. Several uniformed patrol members were already walking across his pasture. Others carried measuring equipment. One individual appeared to be placing markers into the ground. The scene instantly triggered alarm. This was no brief inspection. This looked organized, deliberate, planned. Ethan grabbed his boots and headed outside. The distance between his house and the eastern pasture stretched nearly half a mile, but even from afar he could see the activity continuing. Patrol members moved confidently across land that did not belong to them. As he approached, another detail became clear. A section of his fence had been opened. Not damaged, opened. Someone had intentionally gained access. His pulse quickened. Years of patience and restraint suddenly collided with months of growing frustration. The people crossing his property acted as though they owned it, as though the boundaries that protected private ownership simply didn't matter. By the time Ethan reached his equipment shed, the situation had already crossed a line he never expected to face. And what happened next would bring not only the HOA president's plans into the open, but eventually draw the attention of the county sheriff himself. The sight unfolding across Ethan Walker's pasture ignited a level of concern he had not felt in years. For months, he had tolerated the growing intrusions. He had documented them carefully. He had contacted the HOA. He had reviewed county records. He had remained patient while others might have reacted emotionally. But standing there that morning, watching multiple HOA patrol vehicles spread across his private property while workers drove markers into the ground, he realized the situation had moved beyond simple trespassing. Someone believed they had authority over land that did not belong to them. The realization was both alarming and dangerous. Ethan entered the equipment shed and retrieved the shotgun he normally kept secured for livestock protection and rural security. He had no intention of using it. The firearm represented something else entirely. It represented preparedness. Living on a large rural property meant dealing with predators, trespassers, and unexpected situations. The shotgun was simply part of responsible land ownership. Still, as he carried it toward the pasture, he understood how the situation could appear to outsiders. His goal was not confrontation. His goal was to stop what was happening before it went any further. The morning air felt unusually heavy as he crossed the field. The closer he got, the clearer the scene became. The patrol members were not merely walking around. They were conducting what appeared to be a formal survey. Several metal stakes had already been installed. Orange ribbons marked specific points across the property. One individual carried a clipboard filled with documents. Another appeared to be photographing landmarks. Most disturbing of all, they moved with complete confidence. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty, no sign that they believed they were doing anything improper. That confidence troubled Ethan more than the trespassing itself. People only behave that way when someone higher up has assured them they are protected. As he approached within visible distance, the activity slowed. Several patrol members noticed him. Others turned and pointed. The sight of a landowner walking toward them while carrying a shotgun immediately changed the atmosphere. Movement stopped. Groups gathered together. Equipment was lowered. The confidence that had filled the field moments earlier began to disappear. What happened next surprised Ethan. Instead of leaving, several patrol members appeared to stand their ground. The response suggested they believed they had legal authority to remain exactly where they were. That realization deepened Ethan's concern. This was no misunderstanding. Someone had convinced these individuals that private property boundaries no longer mattered. The standoff lasted only a few moments before an unexpected sound echoed across the pasture. Sirens. Not emergency sirens. A single law enforcement vehicle approaching from the county road. The sound instantly changed everything. Both Ethan and the HOA personnel turned toward the road. Within moments, a sheriff's department SUV appeared near the main entrance to the property. Dust rose behind it as it traveled up the gravel lane. The vehicle stopped near the gate. A deputy emerged first, then another. Finally, Sheriff Daniel Harper stepped out. The sheriff was well known throughout the county. Unlike many elected officials, Harper had built a reputation for avoiding politics and focusing on facts. He had served the county for nearly 2 decades. Property disputes, land conflicts, and development battles were nothing new to him. Yet as he surveyed the scene before him, even he appeared surprised. Multiple HOA vehicles, survey equipment, property markers, private land, an armed landowner standing in his own pasture. It looked less like a neighborhood dispute and more like the beginning of a major legal conflict. The sheriff moved carefully across the field. His deputies followed. Everyone remained calm. No one made sudden movements. Within minutes, the entire situation shifted from a property dispute into an official investigation. Sheriff Harper began examining the markers. He reviewed paperwork being carried by HOA personnel. He studied the positions of the vehicles. Most importantly, he listened. As the investigation unfolded, one fact quickly became obvious. The HOA representatives believed they were operating under authorization from their leadership. They insisted they had received instructions. They believed expansion reviews were underway. They believed portions of the land were under consideration for future community access projects. Most importantly, they believed permission issues had already been resolved. That statement immediately captured the sheriff's attention. Permission from whom? The question hung over the entire scene, because Ethan certainly had not granted any permission, and county records showed no legal transfer of authority. Sheriff Harper requested documentation. The patrol supervisors provided folders. The sheriff reviewed every page. His expression gradually hardened. The deputies exchanged glances. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The documents contained references to proposed easements, future development corridors, potential community infrastructure projects, but none of them contained signed approvals from property owners. Several referenced preliminary plans only. Others appeared incomplete. Yet despite their unfinished status, the HOA patrol had somehow interpreted them as authorization to enter private land. Or perhaps someone had instructed them to do so. Either possibility created serious problems. The sheriff immediately ordered all survey activity halted. Patrol members were instructed to stop placing markers. Equipment was gathered. Photographs were documented. Vehicle locations were recorded. The field suddenly transformed into a scene of evidence collection. Meanwhile, Ethan provided months of security footage. The recordings painted a troubling picture. Repeated entries, unauthorized inspections, fence access, marker placement, dozens of incidents stretching back several months. The evidence was extensive, far more extensive than anyone expected. As deputies reviewed the footage, another discovery emerged. Several of the patrol visits had occurred at times when no active development reviews existed. In other words, some entries could not even be loosely connected to planning activities. They appeared entirely unauthorized. That finding immediately raised larger questions. Who ordered them? Why? And what exactly was the HOA trying to accomplish? The answers began emerging later that afternoon. Sheriff Harper contacted the county planning office. Officials there reviewed records connected to Cedar Ridge's recent expansion efforts. What they found shocked everyone involved. Multiple applications submitted by the HOA contained maps showing access routes crossing private properties, including Ethan's. Even more concerning, some maps appeared to depict those routes as if agreements already existed. But no agreements had ever been approved. No easements had been granted. No legal access rights existed. The maps presented assumptions as established facts. The implications were enormous. If developers, investors, or county officials relied upon those documents, future decisions could be influenced by information that was fundamentally inaccurate. By evening, the sheriff's investigation had expanded significantly. Additional county departments became involved. Property records were reviewed. Survey submissions were examined. Correspondence was requested. Meanwhile, news of the confrontation spread rapidly throughout Cedar Ridge. Residents began asking questions. Many were already frustrated by the HOA's increasingly aggressive behavior. Now they learned that patrol teams had entered private land beyond community boundaries. The reaction was immediate. Concern turned into outrage. Trust began to crumble. Yet the most important discovery had not been made. Late that night, while reviewing documentation gathered during the investigation, one county employee noticed a series of signatures attached to several planning submissions. At first glance, they appeared ordinary, but closer examination revealed inconsistencies. Dates didn't align. Authorization forms looked unusual. Property references contained errors. The possibility emerged that some documents may not simply be inaccurate. They might be fraudulent. The discovery changed everything. What had started as a trespassing complaint was beginning to resemble something far larger, something that could threaten the future of the entire HOA leadership structure. And at the center of every questionable document appeared the same name, Karen Holloway. As investigators prepared to dig deeper into the paperwork, Sheriff Harper realized the case was no longer about patrol vehicles crossing a fence line. It was about uncovering whether a powerful HOA administration had spent months attempting to acquire influence over land it had no legal right to control. And the evidence waiting to be uncovered would soon send shockwaves through Cedar Ridge that no resident would ever forget. The morning after Sheriff Harper's investigation expanded, Cedar Ridge Estates awoke to a level of scrutiny the community had never experienced before. For years, the HOA leadership had operated with little resistance. Most homeowners paid their dues, attended occasional meetings, and trusted elected board members to manage neighborhood affairs. Few residents paid close attention to planning documents, land surveys, or development applications. Now that was changing. News of the trespassing incident had spread beyond the subdivision. County officials were reviewing records, investigators were examining paperwork, residents were asking questions. And at the center of every discussion stood HOA President Karen Holloway. What initially appeared to be a simple boundary dispute was rapidly becoming something much larger. Sheriff Harper assembled a team consisting of deputies, county planning officials, and property records specialists. Their goal was straightforward: determine whether mistakes had occurred or whether someone had intentionally misrepresented property rights. The deeper they looked, the more troubling the answers became. Over the next several weeks, investigators reviewed hundreds of pages of documents connected to Cedar Ridge's expansion projects, applications, meeting minutes, survey requests, development proposals, infrastructure plans, access corridor maps. Most of the paperwork appeared legitimate, but hidden among those records were documents that raised serious concerns. Several submissions referenced future roads crossing privately owned land. Others described utility easements that had never been approved. A few contained authorization statements that appeared unsupported by any legal agreements. Most concerning were documents connected directly to Ethan Walker's property. Repeatedly, investigators found language implying cooperation between the HOA and neighboring landowners. Yet when those landowners were contacted, many had never even been approached. Some had no idea their properties were being discussed in development plans. Others were shocked to discover maps showing proposed access routes through their land. The pattern became impossible to ignore. The documents consistently portrayed future expansion opportunities as far more certain than reality. As investigators continued gathering evidence, another problem emerged. Several homeowners inside Cedar Ridge began reporting similar experiences. One resident discovered HOA officials had referenced portions of his backyard in a future trail proposal without permission. Another learned that common area expansion plans included land not owned by the association. A retired couple found records suggesting possible access rights across a section of their property, despite never granting such rights. Individually, the issues seemed small. Together they painted a disturbing picture. The HOA leadership had apparently been operating under the assumption that future acquisitions, easements, and permissions would eventually be secured. Instead of waiting for legal agreements, plans were being created as though those agreements already existed. That approach might have remained hidden for years if Ethan had not documented the trespassing. Now every questionable decision was coming into view. The pressure on Karen Holloway intensified. Residents demanded explanations. Special board meetings became crowded. Financial records were requested. Expansion plans faced growing opposition. The confidence Karen once displayed began to disappear. Investigators eventually focused on a series of signatures attached to planning documents. Professional document examiners reviewed the records. Their findings delivered the biggest shock yet. Several signatures could not be verified. Some appeared copied from older documents. Others displayed inconsistencies suggesting they had been reproduced rather than personally signed. While investigators stopped short of making immediate criminal accusations, the discovery dramatically increased concerns regarding how certain applications had been prepared. Sheriff Harper understood the seriousness of the situation. Property rights represented one of the most protected legal interests in the county. Any attempt to bypass proper authorization processes could carry significant consequences. As evidence accumulated, county officials suspended multiple Cedar Ridge expansion reviews pending further investigation. Developers who had partnered with the HOA began distancing themselves from the projects. Financial backers requested audits. Legal advisors became involved. What had once appeared to be a thriving expansion effort suddenly looked unstable. For Ethan, the experience remained surreal. He had never intended to become the center of a county-wide controversy. He simply wanted strangers to stop entering his land. Yet his decision to install cameras and preserve evidence had triggered a chain reaction that exposed problems far beyond his own property. Meanwhile, Sheriff Harper's investigation continued, uncovering details. Internal emails revealed growing pressure within the HOA leadership to secure additional development opportunities. Meeting notes showed repeated discussions about increasing property values through expansion. Several board members appeared uncomfortable with the aggressive approach being pursued. Some had voiced concerns months earlier. Those concerns had largely been ignored. Now those same individuals cooperated fully with investigators. The information they provided helped explain how the situation escalated. Karen Holloway had become increasingly focused on transforming Cedar Ridge into a premier regional development. Success brought recognition. Recognition brought influence. Influence brought opportunities. Over time, ambition had begun replacing caution. Lines that should never have been crossed gradually became easier to justify. Unauthorized surveys became preliminary assessments. Private property became future opportunity. Assumptions became plans. Plans became actions. Eventually, patrol teams were walking across land that belonged to someone else. The consequences finally arrived during a packed HOA meeting attended by hundreds of residents. Under mounting pressure, multiple board members resigned. Independent auditors presented preliminary findings. Legal advisors outlined potential liabilities facing the association. Insurance representatives warned of significant exposure. Residents reacted with anger and disbelief. Many felt betrayed. Others worried about how much money had been spent pursuing projects that might never have been legally possible. By the end of the meeting, Karen Holloway's position had become impossible to defend. Within days, she stepped down as HOA President. Several additional board members followed. Emergency elections were scheduled. Outside management consultants were hired. New oversight procedures were introduced. The HOA that emerged afterward looked very different from the organization that had existed only months earlier. For Sheriff Harper, the investigation concluded with administrative penalties, civil actions, and multiple referrals to appropriate regulatory agencies. While some legal matters continued beyond public view, the immediate threat to neighboring property owners had been eliminated. Unauthorized patrol activities ended. Questionable expansion plans were withdrawn. Boundary records were corrected. Future projects would require far greater transparency. Most importantly, property owners regained confidence that their rights would be respected. Months later, life slowly returned to normal. The media attention faded. County officials moved on to other matters. Residents focused on rebuilding trust within their community. Ethan Walker returned to the routine he preferred. His days once again revolved around maintaining fences, caring for livestock, and enjoying the quiet privacy that had drawn him to the countryside years earlier. The orange markers disappeared. The patrol vehicles stopped coming. The tension that had hung over the property finally lifted. One evening, nearly a year after the confrontation, Ethan stood near the same pasture where everything had begun. The setting sun stretched long shadows across the grass. The fences stood exactly where they always had. The land remained his, peaceful, undisturbed, protected. Looking across the field, he reflected on how quickly small violations can grow when left unchecked. A single marker on a fence post, a patrol vehicle crossing a boundary, a notice without authority. Each event seemed minor at first. Together, they revealed a much larger problem. Had he ignored those warning signs, the outcome might have been very different. Instead, patience, documentation, and persistence exposed the truth. The lesson extended far beyond Cedar Ridge. Power without accountability eventually creates conflict. Assumptions do not replace ownership, and no organization, regardless of its influence, stands above the rights of private property owners. As darkness settled over the countryside, the land remained exactly as it should be, not because someone granted permission, not because an HOA approved it, but because the law, the evidence, and the truth ultimately prevailed. And that was the ending no one at Cedar Ridge had expected when a simple HOA patrol first crossed onto a property that never belonged to them.